Hello everyone, welcome to Lockdown Civil War. Today our topic is about the legend and the China missions of General Marshall. In American history, Marshall was the first 5-star general. He had been U.S. Army Chief of Staff, State Secretary, and Defense Secretary. In Second World War, he maneuvered and commanded the U.S. Army and the Allied forces against Nazi Germany and Japan. He was also under in U.S. Congress investigation for Japan's raid on Pearl Harbor, Soviet expansion in Europe, and the Chinese communists taking power. He was even blamed by McCarthy, the extremist, as traitor and sympathizer of communism. Marshall was born on December 31st, 1880, at Uniontown, a small town in Pennsylvania. His father was a business owner of a charcoal factory, and Marshall enjoyed a cozy and a happy childhood in the countryside. When he was a boy, he was quiet and so-so in schooling, no big plan for the future. After high school, his father managed to send him to Virginia Military Institute, and the 4-year military training made him outstanding in academy and personality, composed and resolute. Then he also got acquainted with Lady Course, his first wife, and 4 years older than him. After graduation, he was assigned to Philippines in 1902. And the next year, he was recalled to Oklahoma. In 1906, he got a further military study for 2 years at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and became a teaching staff in this school after graduation. In July 1913, he was promoted to first lieutenant and assigned to Philippines again. And during his vacation in 1914, he visited Japan, Korea, and China. This was his first time connected with China mission. Then Marshall was called back to California for military mobilization and war readiness, and he was promoted to captain. In April 1917, America declared war on Germany, and Marshall came to France with America's 1st Division as a staff. During the war, and his ability and integrity was recognized by General Pershing, and he became his assistant in making plan and a deployment of U.S. troops. During the First World War, he met some figures who would be important to him in the future, such as MacArthur, then a brigadier general, commander of U.S. Rainbow Division, Patton, who commanded U.S. tank troops, and Truman, the future U.S. president, was a captain of field artillery. Sure, also Hitler, then a corporal, being conferred with an Iron Cross medal for his bravery. After First World War, General Pershing was promoted as U.S. Army Chief of Staff, and he kept Marshall by his side. During 1924 to 1927, Marshall was assigned to station in Tianjin, China, as Chief of Staff of 15th Regiment of U.S. Army. According to Marshall, the years in China were his happy times in life, and he also learned and could communicate with people in simple Chinese. And this was his second China mission. The years from 1924 to 1927 in China were a time of revolution and upheaval. With the victory of the nationalist North exploitation, Chiang Kai-shek's betrayal and massacre, Nanchang Revolt, and the Autumn Harvest Uprising. From then on, the Chinese communists waged to take power with armed force. In May 1927, Marshall left China for America. Without expectation, he would have the 3rd China mission later. After getting back to America, Marshall was assigned to teach in War College, Washington. A little while later, his wife Lily died of a heart attack, which made him very sad. And he applied to work in a training center at Fort Benning, Georgia, where he made some new friends with the generals such as Joseph Stabile, the U.S. commander in theater of China, India, and bomber in Second World War, And Bradley, future chairman of U.S. Army Joint Chief of Staff. There he also met his second wife, Catherine, and Franklin Roosevelt, then New York governor and future U.S. president in Second World War. In August 1936, after waiting for 16 years, Marshall was promoted as brigadier general and stationed to Washington State as the commander for the 5th Brigade, the 3rd Division. In 1938, with situation intensified in Europe, Marshall was called to War Department as a director for war planning and vice chief of staff. And in April 1939, he was appointed by President Roosevelt as chief of staff. Marshall was a professional soldier and discreet and serious, and never too much personally involved with the president and other government officials, except routine works. He had never visited Roosevelt's private home in Hyde Park, New York. On issues of military readiness and logistics, weapon development, and the troops maneuvering, he had his own big ideas, never give up, even opposed to that all the rest. There happened once that Marshall opposed to Roosevelt's suggestion directly in the cabinet, which embarrassed the president, and most of his colleagues worried about his future in the War Department. Yet Roosevelt understood him and his honesty and talents. It just kept him state. Before Second World War, American Army that had only a small size of 170,000 soldiers and outdated in training and equipment, facing Hitler's threat in Europe. Marshall boosted greatly American military readiness. Until the end of war in 1945, American Army reached to 8.2 million. In December 1941, after Japan's retreat to Pearl Harbor, Americans joined the war and allied with the UK, the Soviet, and China. Concurrently, European was a priority that Marshall advocated across the England Strait to the continent and soon opened the second battlefield. Churchill insisted to flank from North Africa, Mediterranean, and to attack Italy and Germany in the Soft Valley, alleviated Soviet indirectly. In East Asia and the Pacific, U.S. Army suffered great defeat at the Patton Peninsula, Philippines, and MacArthur fled to Australia, leaving 80,000 U.S. troops and Philippine soldiers behind as prisoners of war. He preferred to counterattack from Philippines. And while U.S. Navy believed the best strategy in Pacific should be centered in Hawaii, hold the Midway and attack to the west, target Japan's Navy and air bases in Guam and Iwo Jima, skip over some islands like Frog, and directly hit Japan's homeland. After Second World War, Marshall resigned as the chief of staff and went to China as Truman's special envoy in December 1945 to mediate China's civil war, which was his third China mission. In March 1946, he visited Yan'an and warmly received by Chairman Mao, who called him the messenger of peace. With his effort, and China's two parties set up military mediation team, agreed to military readjustment, and joint Congress meeting, political consultation, with constitution modifying for a new government. Yet Chiang Kai-shek, who had received $3 billion assistance, unwilling to give up his control. He broke up the agreement, waged the civil war, which failed Marshall's mediation. In January 1947, Marshall left China, and 2 months later, the Kuomintang's army took over Yan'an. After getting back home, Marshall stepped as state secretary. He resumed the U.S. Land Lease Act to Chinese government in Nanjing. Yet due to the corruption and incompetence of the nationalists, the Chiang Kai-shek was defeated and failed finally. to which they blamed Marshall for lack of support. In Europe, it was tangled with the crisis in politics and economy, expansion of the Soviet. American began with Marshall Plan, providing 13 billion US dollars assistance to the West Europe, and resumed its recovery, to which Marshall was conferred with Nobel Peace Prize. In June 1950, outbroke the Korean War. On September 15th, MacArthur landed from Incheon and crossed over to the 30th parallel, northward to the border of China. On September 21st, 1950, Marshall took over as the U.S. Defense Secretary and another mission related to China. In October, a Chinese volunteer army joined the war in Korea, and forced U.S. troops back to the south, retook Pyongyang and Seoul. MacArthur blamed the failure for Truman's interference and Marshall's obscurity in instruction. He even talked about a full-scale war with China and the use of nuclear weapons. In April 1951, MacArthur was sacked, and in September, Marshall resigned and retreated to his private life. General Marshall's integrity and service to the country was well known, winning him great reputation. Yet since 1950 to 1952, when extremist of the anti-communism McCarthy was in hysteria, he even attacked this American hero, blaming too weak to the communists, and resulted in losing China. He slandered Marshall's betrayed American interest by giving up to the Soviet and to the Red China. In 1950, Eisenhower was elected as president. He had always great reverences to Marshall, his longtime leader in military. As to the malicious attack to the general, Eisenhower rebuked and defended Marshall's good fame, which made McCarthyism gradually scorned, despised, and gradually faded away. On October 16th, that's 1959, Marshall passed away at the age of 78. And by his will, his memorial ceremony was just limited to his family and friends. The discreet and low-key Marshall had won great respect among American people, and also his China mission played some roles in his life, more or less. Above is today's program, and thank you for your watching, and see you next time. Thank you, bye.